look at pathos as invoking emotions, but it has a much more important job of reminding the audience or the reader that you're with them. And that you see them, that you value them, that you're human. So that's why the most logical arguments in the entire world are not going to work unless you help a person recognize how they're connected to that logical argument, or even concedes to say, like, yes, I understand your position. Here's this logical argument. And so pathos is all about connecting to audience. And we do this all the time because we are humans talking to humans. It's inevitable that we're going to infuse pathos. And so it's a lot easier to use pathos appeals when you're face to face with somebody because you're reminded of their humanity and your audience is reminded that you are with them, that you see them because you're literally looking at them. It gets a little tougher when you are writing, or if you are writing behind, let's say, a corporate entity. So a lot of people don't recognize that if you are a part of a company, you may be asked to write newsletters or certain kinds of memos that represent the company. And so you have to almost take on this characterization of your company and still have the strong human appeal to any consumers or clients or whoever's going to read it. So there's 5 main ways that we end up using it in writing. So one way is to focus on the individual. So if you're reading an article or a paper or a book or whatever, and you see interviews or somebody is telling a story, that's a good way that somebody is bringing in pathos because we love narrative. We follow that. We follow linear narrative. It does have that bit of a logos appeal that we can follow it easily. But also stories have a very communal, sort of communal ethos to them, and evoking universal human experiences. So there are things that every human, regardless of race or creed or where they grew up or whatever, just has in common. Some of those are the base emotions, anger, love, but a lot of them are just these things we all experience: birth, death, loss, mourning, hunger, excitement, friendship, family. And so if you are trying to connect with somebody, and this goes for beyond writing, even speaking, if you're trying to connect with somebody and you feel that you're very at odds, you can search for one of those things that you have in common. So this happens a lot. I think I used this example a little while ago, but especially as we're coming up on an election year, listen for the ways that different candidates will appeal to, let's say, family values, or appeal to, hard work, or appeal to all these things that people just tend to value in common. People value families, and so you can use that phrase in a very vague sense so that whenever somebody hears it, they are thinking about, well, my family, I value my family, or like health. There's just these ways that we're able to connect with one another. Number 2 is using loaded language and ideas. So this goes back to connotation. Connotation is all about pathos. Of course, it is a very logical, calculated way to get your point across, but you're trying to change somebody's emotion about it. And on Monday, we're going to talk about softening and sharpening words. And you can take a certain word and choose a synonym for that, or a descriptor that's going to make, let's say, something that is a little more controversial, make it sound not as bad, sort of pad it. Versus you could take something, if you want to make people angry and fired up, you could take something that usually isn't very controversial and sharpen it, make the language a little more aggressive, and then you suddenly are moving somebody into action and making them think differently about that. And I keep saying that there are these sneaky, almost unconscious ways that you can change somebody's mind about something, and this is the way to do it. Number 3 is using humor, anger, disgust, any of those emotions, anything that's going to fire up one of those emotions. Bringing in personal details and examples. So if you bring in, your own experience, it's what you did in your last paper, actually. So that last paragraph, you ended up talking about an experience that you had, either recognizing your privilege or recognizing your unprivilege in a certain area. And that was a way for you to add pathos to an otherwise, I don't want to say clinical, but pretty straightforward, not very, personally connecting paper. And lastly, involving the reader in some way. So this is where the call to action, perhaps you in high school had to write call to action conclusions, something like that is like, hey, don't just be a passive reader. I am challenging you in these ways to think differently about this or to act on the information that you have. And in your final paper, that's what you're going to be doing, thinking about, okay, what effect, like what do I want the readers to do as they leave this paper where I've been informing them about this thing. So ways that we use it, this is one of my all-time favorite examples. This was at Loyola Marymount, where it is a rather economically privileged demographic. Everybody has better cars than me, way better cars than me. And a couple years ago, I was sitting in the coffee shop and there was a young lady on the phone, and I tried to paraphrase this. So it wasn't exactly what she was saying, I don't think, but it was pretty close. And she, I'm assuming, was on the phone with a parent. I just guessed based off of context clues. But she said, I need the new iPhone. It has a way better maps thing. My roommate got lost in like Skid Row the other night because her maps sucked. And I was like, oh, good show. Like, that is so manipulative. But it's an example of her knowing her audience. Her audience is a parent. And so her parents, especially if it's her first or second year in college, or even if it's her fourth year in college, away from home, they're going to worry about safety. Your parents worry about your safety. It's kind of like the number one job a parent has is to make sure that you don't, like, get hurt or die. So she was appealing to that. She knew that about her audience. And so she didn't use the argument like, oh, it supports these apps, or, oh, it has a way better camera. That wouldn't have worked on a parent. That sounds like a luxury. But if it has to do with safety, first of all, you can't really get lost in Skid Row. It's literally a grid, and it's a very small space. So she's definitely just sort of laying that on thick. But it was a purely pathos argument. She's not giving reason. Well, she gave a reason for it. And I guess there is some logic to it. It's not the best argument. And she doesn't have really any ethos there. She's appealing to the ethos of her parents, but I just love this. However, here's a fully pathos argument. You don't go out with him. He's creepy. There's no reasons given of creepy times that would justify why this person shouldn't go out with him. Of course, the ethos here is from the Redder. However, she or he could have brought in different examples of people who had, experienced this creepy guy. But a lot of it has to do with just that word creepy. It's a really loaded word, especially in our society. For the ladies in our audience right now, that's one of those words that's a little worse than something like, oh, he's, I don't know, mean. I don't know. There's something about creepy that instills a fear for your safety. Creepy people stalk you. And so that's one of those words that could just sort of stop you in your tracks. And I can't think of a male equivalent for this. One of my students once supplied crazy. That's a term that men don't usually get called, but men certainly do call women crazy. And that's one of those sort of line in the sands, like, oh, don't go out with her, she's crazy. But purely pathos driven, use the connotation of this word as the reasoning. And lastly, pathos isn't just in words. I know that's like an old school emoticon, but emojis are a whole other rhetorical language. One emoji can completely change the meaning of what you were typing, and they take on meanings of their own. I think about, actually, people have written books on it now, of just sort of the shorthand language, like how the eggplant turned into something else. Obviously a more sexual symbol, but it is just supposed to be an eggplant. However, we put meaning in words. Words don't have meaning themselves. That's a whole branch of semiotics and logistics, but like language changes. We could even think about the term gay. The term gay, my grandma still uses it to say that she's happy. But obviously time has changed that, even with, different descriptors of people groups. Certain words are okay, and then there's an evolution that word is no longer okay. So something like an emoji or an emoticon can completely change the tone. So if you took off this LOL and this happy face, the tone would change completely. And I don't have roommates, but when I did, I would feel too uncomfortable to text this, even though I definitely would want to. Because then it is more aggressive. But if you add this on, it completely changes the tone. And that's what Pathos does. Your message is the same, but you've chosen a way to package that message to make it more palatable. Pathos is knowing your audience and adjusting your language or your delivery in order to have the like best outcome for you. So ads, very easy to see in ads. Anything that deals with charity is going to use pity, appeal to guilt and pity. And this is something that I'm very torn about because this is not a good argument. What I'm seeing here is the reason we should donate is because we feel really guilty, literally calling out, this child is starving, look in his eyes, we are not, you need to do this thing. Is it overall a capital G good thing to donate money to starving children? Absolutely. But if we're looking at this purely rhetorically, this is kind of a, I don't know, ethically lame way to get people to donate. But I guess it says more about us as a society. But I think right here is really interesting. Their use of the word share. They could have said it's time to donate, it's time to give. But the word share actually has some more positive connotations. Sharing is caring. We learn to share when we're in preschool, and that's seen as a good thing, a thing we're supposed to do. Giving implies like, oh, I feel bad, so I'm just giving this. And share kind of neutralizes that and brings us back to those elementary school, preschool days, and puts us more at the same level. Like it evokes a sense of humanity that isn't necessarily present if we just say give or donate. So that part is actually pretty good. Shock or fear is another. So PSAs are particularly good at this. There's some very artful PSAs out there. So this one struck me because we see the don't text and drive, but this was a very different delivery, and hopefully you're using some of your logos to put this together. A different message here, don't talk while she drives. So I'm assuming he was talking to his friend. His friend was texting him or talking and was killed, and seeing the effect of it's not just the person who died, there's also this effect, like the blood is literally on your hands, is what I get from this. And so there's damage even for, or that person who's talking to the person on the phone is accountable. And so it's not just you who have the phone in front of you who should be not texting, also be responsible when you're talking to people who are driving. But obviously the splurt of blood is enough to get us and maybe make us feel afraid. Generally good feelings. So this ad is interesting to me because it is intentionally vague to just appeal to the sense of like, fulfillment. So if you didn't know who this was, you could read this and say, oh, believe in something, even it means sacrificing everything. That's so generalized and it's so intentionally vague that it could be appealing to anybody. Anybody can read themselves into that. However, if you did know who this person was, you know that this message is particularly speaking to Colin Kaepernick and how his belief in ending police brutality was what made him sacrifice his, then career. Now he's doing great, especially with the Disney Plus show. So there's these two meanings, but it's left intentionally vague so that people could generally just feel good. Also, look how big his face is. We are forced to look at him in the face. So when I say appealing to humanity, anytime that you're shown somebody's eyes, and especially like you could see his individual pores, it's amazing. There's an intimacy when you look at this that forces you to acknowledge his humanity. Whereas if it was just like an outline of him kneeling or something like that, it wouldn't do the same thing. Appealing to feelings of pride, or even sort of what you want to be in the future. So there's a rhetorical strategy we'll talk about next week, which is basically just saying a lot of really positive language, and the context of whatever message you have surrounded and padded by all of that positive language is going to subtly convince people to be on your side. So this was used most notably in the 2016 election. Hillary Clinton, if you watch any of her debates, she used overwhelmingly positive and affirming language. Sometimes in one sentence you would note like 16 different really positive words. However, we also know that Donald Trump did the opposite of that and used more fear-mongering, and that's much stronger than any of those good feelings. Fear is one of those primal feelings, and so that eclipsed any of the positivity that Clinton evoked. So in here, it's for the Army. Literally, their message is Army strong. We see strong 1, 2, 3, 4, and strength 5. And then we have proud twice. And so repeating these, and obviously having the image of like a child, whether it's a daughter or a sister or something, clearly being like loving to this person. It's going to make somebody have positive feelings towards the U.S. Army and consider joining. Let's see. Okay, cool. Obviously, humor. I'm not going to watch the whole thing. Have you guys watched the whole thing? Because I know you've seen it before. Anytime humor is used, if you've watched the Old Spice commercial, it says very little about the actual soap or deodorant or whatever it is. It's meant to get in your head. It's meant for you to feel good while watching it. And so that good feeling carries you into Target when you go to buy deodorant or a body wash. And then you have a positive association with that. A lot of companies do this with their products, try to make you feel really good about it so that you will want to purchase it. And that happens very unconsciously too. Another way is to link up something that you're saying with a movement so that there's more trust. So a lot of ads are doing that, or a lot of companies are doing that too. So I've seen several makeup companies and like soap companies that will talk about, I think it was like Secret Deodorant had a whole thing about closing the wage gap, and they have a bunch of commercials where it's all about women getting ready to ask for a raise. And so it has this political message that's supposed to make you think of, let's say L'Oreal in this case, as someone progressive and like, oh, L'Oreal understands me. I'm a woman. I am a feminist. I think there should be more women in leadership roles. And now suddenly, like, this is not any ad about mascara at all. The numbers here, the logos here, this is a prop. And so the idea is that they're hoping that because this appeals to me, that they're saying, look, we're with you, that I will then feel good about purchasing their stuff. And lastly, I think this is lastly, yeah. Oh no, okay. Lastly, my favorite one. Anytime that we're just trying to specifically appeal to a certain audience, and as I mentioned, maybe soften or change the tone around something controversial. So this billboard, if you go to Irvine Valley, if you've been here on campus, or maybe this is your first quote-unquote semester, so you haven't literally been on campus, but there is a bus stop right outside of the Liberal Arts Building. And for 3 years, they took it down last year, I think, but for 3 years, this was the billboard that was there. And it's a billboard for Planned Parenthood. The message, it seems, is use birth control, and there's more than one type. And the way they did that was to make birth control look very adorable and like kawaii-like, and use a hashtag squad goals, very clearly catering to the demographic on campus of like, you guys are mainly young college students. And so they wanted to make it sort of cute. And it's also less scary than, let's say, a billboard that I saw on another bus stop, which was a girl with her head in her hands saying, I didn't know I was pregnant. What am I going to do? And it was for, I don't know, like St. Mary's Women's Center or something. That doesn't make you feel good. That's kind of more scary. Whereas this is normalizing something that people feel uncomfortable to talk about. Even by adding male birth control with female birth control, this is the IUD, if anybody wasn't aware, it makes it seem like, no, this is a conversation you should be having with your friends, with your partners. Birth control is something that everybody needs to do. It's not just something that women need to deal with. It makes it seem a lot more approachable. I miss that billboard.